Chapter 25. The Process of Personal Creation and the Pain in the World. By now you may be wondering about those 17 steps to greater happiness, and I want you to know that we will be getting to them shortly. But before we get too deeply into how you, personally, can be happier than God, we must look at a matter that we brushed past at the very outside of this book, but that I promised we would explore and explain before we said goodbye. What of the people who are suffering, who remain in pain, who are oppressed and living in misery? For most positive thinkers and proponents of personal creation there appears to be no answer for the kind of stinging criticism that I reprinted earlier. To refresh your memory, by far the most offensive part of the message is the suggestion that people who have pain in their lives are somehow attracting it with their thoughts. Darfur rape victims did not ask for it. Children who are molested did not ask for it. Starving Africans did not ask for it. To suggest that their incorrect thinking is the cause of this is sickening. If incorrect thinking is not the cause of all this suffering, then what is? Fate? The answer is, of course, that it is humanity's manner of thinking that is the root cause of humanity's great suffering, yet it is not as simple as saying that. For it is not merely the thinking of those who are suffering. It is the thinking of everyone. Dear reader, what's inside of this parenthesis is a suggestion given for me, the typewriter, to complement this subject, however this doesn't make part of the original book. If you would like to have a different view but same meaning of this subject, please read the chapter 21, The Holy Omni-Will Why Things Happen As They Do and When They Do, of the book known as the Book of Murtad. This book is available for free in the same download link. It is true that many of those who are suffering who are living in constant turmoil or abject poverty have taken to considering the present situation their lot in life. They have given in, given up. They have rejected peaceful, non-violent rebellion as pointless or impossible, and by their silent consent they have unwittingly certain not purposefully extended the conditions they inherited from those in their culture or society who have gone before them. And so to some degree it is the thinking of those who are suffering, it is their continuing subconscious or unconscious thought that plays a role in creating the realities they endure. Of course, they did not ask for such conditions and experiences. That is not what is being said here. Yet to deny that the ongoing, continual state of mind of many people within a culture has nothing to do with the experience of that culture is to deny the evidence right before us. But now it should be noted indeed, it must be noted that to a huge extent the suffering of entire cultures and peoples is also created by the collective consciousness of those elsewhere who are not suffering. For it is many of those who are not suffering who allow the suffering of others to continue, turning a deaf ear to pleas for help, and often saying that at some level it is their own fault, or surely, at least, their own responsibility. This let them eat cake consciousness, together with the hopelessness of those who are suffering, creates a virtual wall of thought that it would be difficult for any group of individual to get over, get past, or get around. It must be understood that personal creation works collectively as well as individually, and that is what is being discussed here. There is such a thing as collective consciousness, and it is very powerful. The combined thoughts of the many do play their effect on the combined experience of the few. In fact, fate is the reason that masses of people suffer while other groups of people do not, if we consider fate to be an acronym for, from all thoughts everywhere. Fate is created by the sum total of everyone's ideas about a thing. It is very difficult, although not entirely impossible, for an individual in any closed group or society to overcome the sum total of everyone's ideas within that society, to say nothing about those outside of it. Some individuals have overcome this huge energy obstacle and have risen, against all odds, to tremendous heights within societies or grouping where most others have not. We often call these individuals heroes and we erect statues to them and put their picture on our money. While others have suffered, they have succeeded. Yet what makes the difference? How can this happen? The answer, inevitably, has to do with how that those individuals were thinking. It has to do with how they held their idea of themselves vis-à-vis the whole. It has to do with how they were able to overcome the consciousness around them, and, indeed, the collective consciousness of huge swaths of humanity, which was working against them. It had to do with their using the power of individual determination, commitment, and their innermost ideas of who they are in relation to everything and everyone around them. There is, really, very little question about this. When you talk with such people, this is exactly what most of them will tell you. This is what they say to graduating classes at high school and colleges, where they are inevitably asked to deliver commencement addresses. Everyone wants to know, how did they do it? What is their secret of success? Very few of them, the tiniest percentage of them, will tell you, "Oh, I did nothing. I had nothing to do with it. It was a lucky break." Most of them will say to those graduating classes, "Make no mistakes about this. You make your own luck." Does this apply to the starving children of Africa? To the raped women of Darfur? No. Of course not. Not in the specific sense. People are not making their own luck by sitting down and imagining themselves in such situations, or by consciously using incorrect thinking and thus placing themselves there. It is true that, as mentioned above, some people, in all societies and cultures, fear certain things and unconsciously dwell on those fears to such a degree that they do draw to themselves something of the things they fear. And, yes, a culture of suffering can develop. But that is not what others are sickened by, the suggestion that people bring on their own troubles by incorrect thinking. This statement rings hollow in my heart as well. Yet I know that what can and does happen is that the powerful energy of collective consciousness, which is perhaps the most powerful creative force of all, places in all our lives unhappy experiences and tragic outcomes. Outcomes to which individuals fall prey even though they obviously do not consciously choose to. Can collective consciousness, then, overcome individual conscious choice? Yes. Does it have to remain that way for every individual? No. Jesus himself cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" And few people remember that he was uttering, in the time of his own suffering, words from the Old Testament, which he, of course, knew well. My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Psalm 22:1-3. It is precisely because massive collective consciousness can overcome individual consciousness and individual awareness that collective consciousness is so important, and why raising the collective consciousness of humanity is so vital. The way to raise the collective consciousness of humanity is, of course, to raise the individual consciousness of human beings. Which is why telling about personal creation is good, not bad, affirmative, not negative, something to be encouraged, not something to be put down and ridiculed and made wrong because someone isn't getting all the words exactly right. So we know that even spiritual masters of the highest order can find themselves at the effect of mass consciousness. We see, then, that surely the suffering people of Darfur and the starving children in Africa and molested children and others in our world who are deeply injured, individually and collectively, are certainly not at fault in the matter. Yet the question is not whether they are at fault. No one teaching about personal creation or the energy of attraction, by the way, has ever suggested such a thing. This is a straw man, a manufactured conclusion drawn by those who would unfairly characterize their message. The question is whether the divine gift of personal creation given to all human beings can be used to alleviate such suffering. And the answer, of course, is yes. Jesus stands as one breathtaking example of this. It is clear that Jesus was not the victim of his circumstances, but the creator of them. His call to God was a moment of forgetfulness. I am so very glad that it was recorded in the Bible, because it signals to all of us that even the greatest of masters can have a moment of forgetfulness, and gives us great hope when we, too, experience such weak memories, imagining ourselves to be the victim of our circumstances, rather than to be at cause in the matter. Yet Jesus rose to his own higher understanding in the next moment, using personal creation to continue on his journey, and we can, too. That, too, was his example for us to follow. And there have been others as well throughout human history who have been such examples for us, even in the time of their greatest travail. Nelson Mandela comes to mind contemporarily. I am sure that Mr. Mandela may feel uncomfortable being mentioned in the same context as Jesus, yet was not his response to his oppressors a Christ-like response? And has he not set an example not only for his own people, but for the world entire? Yet now, a question. If all human beings can act in this way, even in the midst of their forgetfulness, why do we not do so? Do we see ourselves as victims of our own impotence? Do we imagine that our lives and our world are showing up the way they are because this, at some level, what God wants? If so, we are badly and sadly mistaken. The world is the way it is today not because God wants it that way, but because we do. We do. If we did not, we could change the world overnight. We could eliminate the pain and the damage and the sadness and the suffering in the blink of an eye. We could put an end to oppression and repression and depression so fast it would make your head spin. We could eliminate poverty and starvation and hopelessness in one fell swoop. We could do all of this if we wanted to, if we really wanted to. The truth is, we do not want to. Individually, we may, in some cases. Collectively, we clearly do not, or it would be done. Nothing that has been inflicted upon humanity by humanity is impossible for humanity to reverse. I encourage all of us to remember that always, and to carry as a banner of a compassionate and caring people. Nothing that has been inflicted on humanity by humanity is impossible for humanity to reverse. I believe that we will one day reverse the conditions of poverty and oppression and powerlessness and all the human-caused suffering of our species. And I believe that day will be coming sooner rather than later. I believe human beings everywhere are soon going to rise up and demand it, out of a new sense of who we are and how we want life to be on this planet. And I believe that many individuals will lead the way in this spiritual revolution by demonstrating that it is possible to be happier than God. I'll go further. I think that people like you, reading this book right now would be willing to help in beginning this process if you thought there was a way to do that. Well, there is.